Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, traveling responsibilities with your kids, presented by doctors Richard Butler and Rachel Dodds. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Over to you, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're delighted to be here today and share with you a few stories. We wanted to, Richard and I just released a book, and it's funny, we're both academics and have businesses on the side and things like that. But throughout conversations, and I think during the pandemic, when so many of us were just not allowed to travel at all, it really hit home to us that travel can be so much more than just a flight. Of course, there's a climate crisis going on and we need to be more responsible, which is something we're going to talk about today. But traveling with children can be so enlightening and help them become more resilient. And through traveling with our children, I think it exposes us to all sorts of things we never knew were possible. So we wanted to share with you some of our stories, and we have talked to parents around the world about their experiences, and that's what we're going to share with you today.
Hopefully, as academics, we won't be too boring for you. We've got a fair amount of experience of traveling both with children and, in my case, with grandchildren. So we hope we can pass on some ideas that will make traveling with children not only more responsible, but still be fun, and fun for them and fun for you.
It's always fun, right? That's it. Traveling. So traveling with kids. First question, is it possible to even travel the same way you did before you had children? I was a big backpacker when I was growing up, and I did wonder, do we struggle to ensure our kids enjoy the same things we do? I was just talking to someone from WWF, and he said he went on a wonderful trip to see the butterflies in Mexico with his kids, and he loved it and his kids hated it. And how can you do it better? So we wanted to get rid of some of these myths that it doesn't have to be more expensive. It doesn't have to be harder to travel more responsibly. And, when you have children, it can open things up. So this is a picture of Richard with two of his grandkids, and this is a picture of me with my daughter. And yeah, please don't repost it. I never want her to be a social media icon, but I thought it was important that you knew what we looked like.
You can't, it isn't always the same traveling with children, but, why should it be? It's a whole new experience once you've got kids or grandkids, and it's exciting for them, and it can be exciting for you. Sometimes it may seem as if it's going to cost more or be more trouble. It shouldn't cost more. If you're traveling responsibly, you're saving resources, and you can make it fun for the kids to enjoy it, to find new things, to learn new things. Why would you want everything to be the same? I didn't enjoy everything when I was traveling with adults, and I'm sure your kids won't enjoy everything traveling with you. But, there are tips and there are things you can learn as well as they can learn. So hopefully we'll give you some ideas, and the book has a lot of info on things you can do to lessen your impact and get more enjoyment.
And Dick, would you share the story about when you traveled to the Czech Republic when your daughter, I think it was, or your son was first born? Such a good story.
Yeah, my wife and I, we had a 6-month-old girl, and I'd been invited to a conference in Czechoslovakia. This is in 1973, when the Russians were still in Czechoslovakia. But that encouraged everybody to come and bring children. So we traveled back to Britain from Canada, got on to Czechoslovakia, and had all sorts of things go wrong, and the amazing amount of people who stopped and helped us. We got to the railway station in Prague, got on a very busy train with our 6-month-old daughter, and along comes the ticket inspector and a guard with a submachine gun. And he comes back in 10 minutes later and waves for us to go with them, much to our sort of rather horror and worry. And he takes us along the train to find an empty compartment, puts us in an empty compartment, points to the sort of empty seat and to our daughter and suggests we lay her down. And that was just the first time. We found an immense number of people who were fascinated that we come from Canada with a young baby. They tried to get us all sorts of things. They were fascinated by the baby carrier. And we had a wonderful time. And taken the baby, although she had to sleep in a drawer on a pillow in a drawer because there was no crib. It really made the holiday great. We saw a lot of things we wouldn't have seen. We got special treatment because we had the daughter, and although she's too young to remember it, it was just a great experience, and it whetted our appetite for travel with the children as we got two more, because it had been such a good experience. And it continues. Other people are fascinated that you'll travel with children if the children are not incredibly badly behaved and annoying everybody. And most times people are willing to help you. They can remember what it's like when they were traveling with children. So don't be put off by traveling with children. It can be added fun.
Yeah, it's true. It's like you've entered a whole new club when all of a sudden you have a baby. Or even, I mean, as a female, when I was pregnant, all of a sudden, you know, everyone all of a sudden started to give me a seat. And I think it's the last time that that ever happened to me. So what is responsible travel? There's a lot of information out there about travel and about parenting and about regenerative or sustainable or green or slow, or, I mean, it can be absolutely overwhelming. But in a nutshell, responsible travel, which is also called regenerative or green, there's so many definitions, but it's basically travel that leaves a place better than we found it. So how can we be more responsible? How can we be more mindful of the places we visit, understanding of the people we come to, ensure that we have an economic impact that's positive for the community? And, you know, we've probably all seen signs, even now they're coming back again, but before the pandemic, of over-tourism or residents uprising saying they don't want people there. You know, you can be part of the problem or you can be part of the solution. And one of the reasons why we wanted to leave the academic world and write a book for everyone is that I feel like not everyone has the solutions, and we wanted to be able to provide it for them.
And we have to face it, academics are part of the problem. We travel. Rachel and I have traveled to many countries. We've run up a lot of carbon miles, and we regret it, but in part it's inevitable with the nature of the job. But it doesn't stop you being less invasive, less problematic. You can't be perfect. Nobody is perfect. And if you can't leave it better, at least make sure you don't leave anywhere worse. So cut it down, your impacts to the minimum, increase the benefits to local people and quite often to yourself by doing that. And don't feel guilty if you are doing the best you can.
Yeah, it's true about the guilty thing. I remember when my daughter was born, I almost had unanimous from even people who knew me really well that I should buy a minivan and all of a sudden only ever go to Disneyland or within, you know, 10 miles of my house, and that it was going to be all inclusives, and that was the only choice I had with children. And that's just not the case. And me, like Richard, I took my daughter to Morocco when she was 4 months old, and people told me I was crazy. But actually it was amazing. I carried her, she couldn't crawl, she couldn't move, she couldn't eat anything except for what I provided her. And people opened doors for us. You know, in a market, some woman gestured to me to go behind the curtain so I could feed my daughter in private. And I don't think anyone would have ever done that to me without kids. And, you know, even teenagers, people, there's a way that teenagers or any age children have a way to interact with people that we just don't have. Maybe they don't have the same kind of anxiety or nervousness that we have, but it opens up a whole new world. And so those are some of the things we wanted to share with you. So what does it mean for children, for self-confidence and independence? I think mindfulness are some of the kinds of things. And I think that sometimes kids can learn as much between the poles as they can between their ears. I remember, for example, when I took my daughter to Japan. I had a work project in Japan and we went for a month, and she was almost 3, but I don't know if anyone has ever had a 3-year-old. You pretty much live your life in a playground. And my only mistake was not learning the Japanese word for playground. But we were in Tokyo, and if anyone's ever been to Tokyo, there's 20 million people in that city, and the train station is the busiest, I think the busiest thing I've ever seen in my life. But all of a sudden, she gained this kind of independence that after being there a week, she wanted to walk through the train station without holding my hand. To be fair, I wasn't going to let her go on her own. I wasn't quite ready yet, but she wanted to do it without holding my hand. And I will never forget the look of absolute glee on her face when we went over to find her dad, who had gone to go get tickets in advance. and her saying, I did it, Daddy, I did it all on my own. And she was brimming with pride. And it just really gave me this understanding that you can build independence and self-confidence in your kids just by allowing them to do things within boundaries, of course, and you have to know your own kids. Some kids will go running off at the first chance they can. My daughter thankfully listened to the kind of rules, but travel can also bring about resiliency. I can't remember how many times that we've been somewhere and the bus just didn't show up, and you have to wait for the next one. There's nothing you can do. And it's easy to get angry and mad, but when you're traveling, there's always going to be another bus. And so we learned to play a lot of games. We learned, she now packs her own suitcase. She understands all these different things that I think when we were traveling, that I just didn't have control over things like I did at home. And so I had to let go, but I also had to let her be part of the solution as well. And it's amazing now, some of the things I realized that really instilled with her. So for example, we were in Mexico when she was 4 and we were walking down the beach, and of course almost everybody in the town and along the beach offers you to swim with dolphins. And 4-year-old girls love mermaids and dolphins and unicorns. And so she looked at me and she said, Mommy, dolphins. And it gave me a real opportunity to say, okay, sweetie, I agree, I love dolphins too, but where do you think dolphins live? And I said, do they live in swimming pools? No, Mommy, they live in the ocean. And I said, so is it okay to be with wild animals? And I didn't say anything else. I didn't say yes and I didn't say no. But as we walked along, I realized that when we walked back down that street and somebody said, hey, little girl, would you like to go swim with dolphins? She looked at them and she said, dolphins belong in the wild, not in swimming pools. And then all of a sudden it filled me with pride to realize that she had learned a lesson all on her own and had the ability to think about something differently. And for her 8th birthday, she gave all her birthday money to save the tigers. And again, that was her own doing, it wasn't mine. And those kinds of things I realized she learned through traveling.
It really is an experience for kids, and they can be a big help too. We took 2 of our children to Australia for 4 months when I was on a sabbatical, and we were in Kakadu National Park, and it had been a fairly arduous trip and I couldn't be bothered doing very much the next day. And the 2 kids argued, you said we go a cruise down the Yellow River, you've got to get up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, you promised you'd take us. So we signed up, we went on the trip, and it was an incredible trip. And they said, see, we told you, you should have stuck to what you said. And to cap it all, as we're coming back, my son went off and talked to the ranger who'd led the trip. And he came back and he said, Dad, the ranger said we should check with them tomorrow, because if it rains tonight, we're not going to be able to go the route we thought we were going to go. So he and I went at 6 the next morning to the ranger's office, and the guy said, oh, yeah, no, it hasn't rained as much as we thought. You'll be able to get through the river in the station wagon. But if you do get stuck, get out on the left side, not the right side, because that's where the crocodiles are. So that was really funny. We got in the car, we drove off, we got to the river that we had to ford in the car. And sure enough, it was about 4 inches deep. So I'm thinking all the rest of the family will be looking out the right side to see crocodiles. So I creeped through the water, looked back, and they were all fast asleep. So I woke them up and said, you missed the crocodile. But I was glad that my son had reminded me to go and check with the guy. We wouldn't have wanted to have got stuck in the tributary of the Yellow River and wondering which side of the car to get out of.
That's awesome. So funny. I could share so many, but we wanted to move on now and give you some practical tips. It can't just be all about our travel stories. And so we wanted to talk about, first of all, planning. And, where to go is one thing, but choosing where to go can make a huge difference from a sustainability point of view. So first of all, if you fly somewhere, no matter what, you have an impact, because travel is one of those places that you bring people to the point of consumption. And so flying one long haul flight is about the same as driving a car for a year. But if you do fly, you can make big differences. So you can stay longer. You can travel at times when it's not so busy. So some people love crowds. This is a picture of Banff National Park in the winter, actually in low season, and it's still very busy. But some places have gotten completely over touristed. And when residents don't want tourists in their community anymore, that's when there's a problem. So some places can handle crowds, other places cannot. If there was this many people on a trail, for example, in a national park just outside Banff Center, not so good. So you can make a choice about where you travel. We're often limited by school holidays, so that's difficult when we have kids. But when your children are younger, if you're a grandparent, parent, aunt, or uncle, you can take your kids at off season. It's usually way more affordable, way less crowded, and the local people are much happier to see you.
And in some places, the weather is much better than it is in July and August. If you're going to Europe, certainly May and June and September are great times to go and nowhere near as busy and cheaper in terms of airfare. So if you've got the flexibility with small kids, really try and take advantage of it. It's a win-win for everybody.
And there's some practical tools. So this is, I'm hoping it's showing up now. This is just a graph from the DEFRA. It's emissions from different modes of transport. So you can see how much it actually takes. So for example, if you're in Europe, then you can take the Eurostar. When you're in Canada or the United States, it's much harder because we don't have fast link trains. And so a lot of times we do have to fly from Vancouver to Toronto. It would take, 37 hours to drive or 5 hours to fly. And it's just not feasible sometimes. But when we do fly, we can stay longer. Having a direct flight, you use more fuel, taking off and landing. So try and avoid the stopovers and try and make sure that you go direct, and you can see now how long it's going to take. Maybe it's not worth going somewhere for a weekend for a long haul flight, and just making those different choices. And again, just to reiterate what Richard said, don't feel guilty. Doing one thing better is actually better than doing nothing at all. So you can't be perfect, and we're not asking you to, but thinking about the impacts of when you're going and where you're going and how you're going will make a difference.
And remember,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, remember, if you're looking to hire a car, figure out if you really need a car or whether you can get there in some other way. Local buses are often quite effective and can get you places cars can't go. There are certainly cities in Europe and elsewhere where they don't allow private cars now, but the local bus will take you there. It's often a lot cheaper and a lot more fun to go on the local bus. In Fiji, to go almost anywhere, the local buses are efficient, they're friendly, they're fun, and they're reliable, and they come pretty much on time. So don't automatically think about renting a car. It may be a lot more convenient, may end up being a lot more costly and a lot more problematic of trying to find out where to go. So look at your options and plan them and think about them. You can often save money, you can often save time, and particularly you can often save emissions.
And stress. Sometimes I find actually hiring a car and figuring out where to park it can be just more stressful, just that one element. So I'm a big fan of not having to have one more thing to consider and take care of when I'm traveling with my family. And there's lots of types of holidays. We do talk in the book quite a lot about the impacts of each type of holiday, everything from cruise to traveling on your own, to camping, to voluntourism and some of the issues. There's all sorts of information out there, and I think it can be really overwhelming for many, many people. But the key thing is every type of holiday can be more responsible. So for example, even if you decide to go to Disneyland, and I actually took my daughter to Disneyland, I think I was the only family who was carrying around a reusable water bottle, but they do have reusable water stations there. And just that one impact, if you think 400,000 people go through Disney's doors a day, if everybody had a takeaway coffee cup and everybody had 5 bottles of water because it's so hot, imagine just the impact of that one tiny, tiny thing. And so there's no effort that's too small. We stayed somewhere local, we walked, we tried out all the different local restaurants, and Disney was for my daughter, but I've also taken her camping. And I remember when my dad took us camping, the first thing he did was to draw a line across the campsite, and we had to clean up all the garbage off the campsite before he would put up our tent. And only when the garbage had been cleaned up were we allowed to go off and play. And those kinds of memories from when I was a kid, I actually realized that I do a lot of that same kind of thing with my daughter. And I grew up hating litter. And now my daughter is growing up hating litter. And so I feel those small things we do when we're kids actually really tip over into when we're adults.
And think, you know, when your kids go to school, they almost certainly will take a reusable water bottle with them. Not many people send their kids off to school or anywhere with a plastic water bottle, you know, garbage bottle. They send them with renewable bottles. So you probably got enough renewable water bottles to be able to take with you on holiday. You don't have to rely on being able to buy bottled water somewhere, which can be phenomenally expensive in some places. So think about what you've got and what you can use already. You don't have to be spending a fortune and buying all sorts of new things. It's a question of thinking ahead a bit. And then there's a certain degree of having familiar things with you on holiday that keep children happy. So taking their favorite water bottle with them, maybe one way of sort of easing the stress of travel for them.
You're right. And I always bring reusable containers with me so that if I am staying somewhere that has breakfast, I can usually pack a couple snacks for lunch. I feel like when kids get hangry, it doesn't matter what age, or adults get hangry. I also feed my husband sometimes when he gets that way. But having something on hand without having to stop and buy something all the time, which is then really consumptive. A lot of times it's wasteful. A lot of times it's not to your kid's flavor, but I almost always had some fruit and veggies on me at any time. And it also helped that when we were going somewhere where the menu wasn't maybe what I would normally feed my kids, I'd said, you know, why don't you eat half an avocado and then you can have some French fries. And so it was always a bit of a negotiation. And I remember reading a book before I had kids that somebody said, I think it's Barbara Colarasso, How to Raise Children. And she said, never negotiate with anyone over the age of 2. I think she's quite right. But we did a lot of those negotiations about, hey, you know what, if you choose somewhere to eat and you choose something that's local and it's under a certain amount, then you can have ice cream afterwards. And all of a sudden I'm teaching, you know, the kids, my daughter and her friend, how to add up, how to look at the ingredients, how to make decisions. And then there's a reward at the end, which takes the stress off me by offering 1,000 choices of what to have for lunch. I let them decide. And as long as there was some sort of components of healthy in there, I was okay with it. So I feel like sometimes we as parents try and just take on everything when we're traveling. It's easier, but actually I think giving some of that responsibility to our kids is great. One person in our book wrote a great story. Her name's Catherine Vertesi, and she has 4 kids, and she loved art galleries. And so her thing was that she wanted her kids to love art. And I wish I had learned this when my daughter was young. But she was in France and they went to the Louvre. And at the time, it was the time of the Ninja Turtles, Raphael, Donatello, I can't remember, there's 4 of them. And each of our kids had a favorite Ninja Turtle. And she said, okay, who's your favorite Ninja Turtle? And they were talking about it. They were all excited. She said, we're going to go to the Louvre. And she got, I don't want to go to a museum. But instead, she took them and she showed them one piece of art from each of the turtles. And she explained why it was interesting and why it was significant. And then they left. And her thing was, if you make it interesting and relevant to your kids and you don't overdo it, then all of a sudden they find a way to become interested in what you're interested in. And that really stuck with me, that having the forethought a little bit to say, how can I make this relate to my kids? How can I get them to be engaged in something that I also like to do? Interestingly, her children are now all grown and they still go to art galleries and they take their kids to art galleries. So it's perpetuated through time. So every type of holiday can be better and it can be exciting for your kids. It doesn't just have to be a holiday for your kids all the time, because happy kids make happy parents. So
And
we wanted to move.
Art galleries are wonderful places. They're more than art. The art galleries in Glasgow, for example, I took my grandchildren to a few years back, and they were fascinated because they were the same grown as an art gallery, but it's much more than art. It has a Spitfire hanging from the ceiling, so we could walk around the upper gallery and be at the same level as the Spitfire. It had models of boats. It had natural history sections where they could go and look at extinct birds and discuss why there were no great auks left now, because we killed them all. So it turned into a fascinating day. And in fact, we stayed, instead of staying in the morning, we had lunch there and we stayed the whole day. And they just found enough things to look at and questions to ask, which left me silent sometimes. But, you know, they were good questions and they were interested. And they looked at some of the paintings and wondered why this was there and what that meant. And so you can get a little bit of history in there as well. And pretty well all the museums in Britain are free. So it's a great free day out. And if the weather's not very good, as it can be in lots of parts of Scotland in particular, going into a museum can get you somewhere warm and dry, or in the heat wave, air conditioned and cool. And they can have fun looking at stuff that they would never see otherwise, and realize what it was like for our generation or the generation before us, in terms of how they lived, what they looked at, what's in the pictures. Well, that's because that's what it looked like in the 1800s. So they may turn up their eyes at the idea of a museum, but it's a lot more than just looking at pictures. You can get a lot more out of it quite easily.
And I think the same goes for anything. So, you know, I don't think you should, as a parent, give up what you love, or as a grandparent, give up what you love. You just have to find a different way to engage your kids in it as well. So what about booking? You know, we talked about all the different things you can do, but where do you even find this information? So a couple of things I wanted to share. For example, if you're booking an Airbnb, you could try booking through Fairbnb or EcoBnB, which offers the same types of accommodation, but they've already been vetted to show that they're giving something back, or they've got better environmental policies. Book Different is another site. It's, instead of booking.com, it's Book Different, and a percentage of the proceeds goes back to local initiatives, things like that. If you're looking for tour holidays, things like if you want to go whale watching, or you want to go on a cycling holiday or a trekking holiday, actually even any type of holiday, responsibletravel.com has every single tour operator that's listed, and they've gone through and they've done the hard work for you. And you can find tons of information on their site, which is really interesting. If you're doing it yourself and you're booking, Skyscanner, which is, and Google Maps, which is what you see on the screen, now when you type in your destination, you can see the most carbon efficient way to get there. And you can do the same thing on Skyscanner. So when you're booking your flight, it'll tell you the most carbon efficient way to go. So again, it's been taken away for you. This is just an example of all the different types of family holidays that you can find on responsibletravel.com, which is, you know, sometimes it's about having something that's just done for you. We as parents have enough on our plate. Sometimes it's nice to just know where to go and get that information in advance.
If you're booking something individually with a specific place, try and check. Don't be put off or be soft soaked by their greenwash. Ask them a few questions about whether they really do employ local people, where they get their food from, and so forth. There's an awful lot of false advertising that claims to be sustainable, green, and whatever, and it's simply putting a name on it. If you hit a website like Responsible, then a lot of the work has been done for you in terms of checking who's on there. But there are a lot of ones out there that claim things that simply aren't true. And if you're doing it all individually, try and check a bit more carefully that they really are doing what they say. And when you get there, ask them and check that they're doing it, so that you can put a comment on Facebook or TripAdvisor or something else afterwards, praising them if they really are making a difference and doing the best they can, or if they're just claiming something that they're not. It's important that we make people realize it's serious, the things that can be done. They shouldn't be boasting they're doing things that they're not. So look carefully at what they're claiming and see if it really matches up with what they say.
And remember, we vote with our wallets, right? These kinds of experiences wouldn't exist if travelers and tourists didn't demand them. So the same thing goes with animal holidays. If it says wild animal, chances are it's a wild meaning you shouldn't be interacting with it. So if there's an opportunity to ride elephants or pet tigers, have a second think, who is it harming and who is it benefiting? And just by making those simple choices, those can have a big impact. And in the book, we give a lot of detail about the kinds of questions to ask or the types of tour operators which are doing better and where you can find this information, because it is overwhelming. And the same thing goes for packing and planning. It's not just about choosing your holiday and when to go and how to get there, but it's about the packing. And I think I mentioned earlier, I get my daughter to pack her own suitcase now. But even preparing, when kids are really little, you can get them to take all the packaging off if there's no recycling in the place you're going. Or make sure you have tons of games for the road. I always now, even though my daughter is almost 10, I always have a pen and a notepad in my purse so that when we're waiting in line for a restaurant, or we're on a subway, or even when we're going for a hike, we can play games and write down things. So when she was 5, she always complained, I don't want to go on a hike. And I used to say, okay, well, when we get home, we're gonna build a fairy garden. What kinds of things could we put in the fairy garden? And every few minutes we'd stop and would jot something down in the notepad. And before we knew it, the 2-hour hike was over and she was completely distracted. And so that's really the key. You always have to have something to distract, but it doesn't mean you don't have to do the things you don't like to do either.
There is the old adage with packing that says, pack your bag and then unpack it, take out half the clothes and double the amount of money in your wallet. And there's a lot of truth in that. We tend to take a lot of stuff on holiday that we don't need and we don't use. And every ounce you take on a plane is burning carbon. It may not seem much, but I remember talking to someone from British Airways who said they were able to plot if they left a used tea bag on the plane over the course of the year, how many grams of carbon that single tea bag would use to be transported around the world. So, don't fill up your bag with the 23 kilo load that it's maybe permissible. You want to leave some space perhaps for bringing stuff back. And if you're taking stuff for kids to mess around in, maybe they can leave it there, give it to a charity, take books, leave them with the charity, buy new books or buy used books when you're there. Let children help with the packing and let them it's a good idea to let them take one favorite thing with them. It gives some degree of comfort and familiarity if they're worried while they're traveling to have a favorite small toy. You have to be careful what you let them have. If you've ever seen the Billy Connolly movie, What We Did on Our Summer Holiday, there's a bit of trouble with a 4-year-old girl whose favorite thing is a pet rock that weighs about 4 kilos. And the dad has an interesting discussion as to why Norman, the pet rock, can't really go with them on holiday. But that's a bit of an extreme case. So a lightweight teddy bear or stuffed toy or favorite book or something can be useful. But you do have to explain to them that you can't take everything you want, and you may want to buy stuff when you're there and bring it back. And that will mean leaving some of the stuff you took when you went there. So it's good to let them help with the packing and explain to them why, if you're going somewhere, if it's hot there, why you won't need that favorite sweater, or you won't need that hat, or you will need a hat for the sun. So letting them participate in the packing, not take it over, and particularly if they're at the age they can handle a small suitcase that's a carry-on bag, then that is great, because it teaches them what is important, what isn't important, what's essential, what they might like to take but they can't really take. So having them participate in the packing can be a meaningful experience, and it can be a useful experience as well.
And don't get stuck by letting your children pack whatever they want and then you carrying around their backpack for them for the rest of the trip. That only happened to me once, and I learned my lesson by saying, actually, I'm not carrying that. If you don't remember it, then it stays behind. And that was a real lesson of, you have to carry it, not me. And that's changed a lot for me too, traveling with my daughter. So the same goes when we're traveling. There's all sorts of things that you can do when you're traveling to have less of an impact. For example, I said I like to go hiking. No one else in my family really does, but I always have games. And even when we are waiting for her dad, we went to go pick him up from the airport yesterday, and the 20-minute wait turned into a 40-minute wait, and she's bored. And can we go? And how come it's taking so long? And are we there yet? But we were the ones waiting. We played games. I said, how many more people do you think are going to come through the hallway before we see dad? I guess 18. Well, I'm going to guess 20. And after we were wrong 6 times, then I had to change it. What do you think dad's going to be wearing when he comes through? How many dogs do you think we're going to pass on this hike? Or can you balance on that rock for how long? So it's just about occupying them sometimes and distracting them. But now it's about having fun and playing games. And I think maybe as adults we've forgotten how to play games, but I have a pretty good repertoire now. I was also the parent, I'm not sure if it was a good idea or not, but I was very against screens until my daughter was about 3.5. And I was the one walking up and down the aisle in the airplane or in the train or on the bus as she was learning to walk, distracting her rather than giving her an iPad. And it gave me a lot of tools on how to distract my daughter so that it wasn't a constant meltdown. And they've given me good learning opportunities. And, now I take her to the cabin and we have a no devices rule at our cabin, and she doesn't even ask why anymore. And for me, that was a good thing. She's excited now when she sees a whale when we're on a ferry, and that's a good thing too. And I think this also happens when you're back at home.
Yeah, the good things you do when you're on holiday, if you've been listening and doing responsible things, they don't need to stop when you go home. My grandson had a birthday fairly recently, and like I guess a lot of kids, he couldn't really think he knew what he wanted. He wanted a new Game Boy, he wanted a special chair to sit and do this and everything that was rather a lot of money. And then, of course, he was having a birthday party, and friends said, "What do you want?" And for other 8-year-old kids, they're not going to bring a Game Boy or something. So Graham had been to the local wildlife refuge where they care for sick birds and sick animals and so on. And he decided off his own bat that he would get his friends to make a donation to the wildlife refuge. They could bring an envelope to his house with money in, and he would take it all to the wildlife refuge. So they did that, and a lot of the parents thought that was a great idea instead of wasting money on a useless toy or useless game or something. And his mom and I took him to the wildlife refuge, which was run by an elderly couple, and they took us a tour to see bald eagle with a broken wing and an owl with a damaged foot and a deer that had lost a leg and so on that they were looking. And he gave them the envelopes, and I think it came out to about $120. And he had a fascinating morning going through the place with these people, the elderly couple. They told him what they would use the money for and how much they needed to buy food for the animals and so on. And he went back and gave a presentation on it at school. And several of his friends decided to do the same thing when their birthdays came up. And all of that had come about because we'd been to, on one of the holidays, we'd been to a bird refuge. And he'd been fascinated by how they were taking care of sick and wounded birds and so on. So the holidays and living at home, they play out together. What you do in one place, you can do at home. There's no need to just be environmentally conscious on holiday or environmentally conscious at home. Many of the things you do work out better using your reusable water container at home as well as at school and as well and on holiday. Considering how you travel at home, do you really need to drive? Can you cycle? Can you walk? So don't sort of take the tips we're giving, use them on holiday, and then forget about them. Because day trips out from home still use carbon, still have an impact. So going to things like local markets, buying food there and so on, supporting local projects can really make a difference in your hometown as well as when you're on holiday.
Yeah, and it doesn't just have to be environmental, it can be social too. I remember actually meeting a girl when I was on holiday because my father made sure that we learned a few words of the local language. And I still remember asking for por favor, un café con leche y leche muy caliente, which means please may I have a coffee, but with the milk very hot, because that's how my dad liked it. And because I said that, a little girl came up and talked to me, and I, for the whole time we were in this town in Mexico, you know, all of a sudden it opened doors because I made an effort to speak the local language. And I think I was 6 or 7 at the time, but I remember being so proud of being able to order coffee for my father. But I think that comes when we go home, right? In our local towns, there's lots of people from different places around the world, and it gives us an opportunity that we become a bit more empathetic towards others when we make an effort to try and interact with them. And I think that through our children is a great thing. There's lots of, we put quite a lot in the book too. There's lots of ways to be an armchair tourist. So you can set up, you can find out about webcams for animals for different places. If you're thinking about going somewhere, you can find out. There's a lot of virtual tours that you can do before you get there, so you can get the lay of a museum or get the lay of a park or things like that. So there's a lot of tools that help you stay curious at home and be involved at home. And those kinds of things that you learn when you're traveling can happen at home too. And maybe next time on your next trip or your next holiday, you'll do one more thing to make your holiday more responsible. Or maybe you'll convince someone like Richard's grandson, Graham, who then got all the other kids involved in the refuge site. We're just making we're making the world a better place, and we can keep going, which is great. So if you'd like to find out more, if you're in the United States, there's a code for a 10% discount and free shipping. That's only for the US. So if you're in Canada, the book is available on Amazon, and it's in kids' books and a few other places. We'd love to have your questions. We'd love to have your comments. There was so much to cover that we just couldn't go through everything in half an hour, but we're happy to answer any questions and hear more about it. We've worked in the field. We've been trying to make the world a more sustainable place for a long time, and we've made lots of mistakes along the way, but hopefully we've given you some tips on how to avoid those same mistakes. So thank you very much for listening to us.
Well, thank you too. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that if you do have any questions, you can submit them via the question field in your control panel. I know one of our guests really likes and uses the rule, don't pack what you can't carry, and still uses it with her child today. So that's an excellent idea, that's for sure. Unfortunately, we don't really have a lot of questions from our guests today. So I'm going to throw it back to you guys for any closing comments you might have.
Yeah, we should have.
Go first.
We should have titled the book "Grandparents" as well, grandchildren as well. We did it thinking of traveling with children. We put traveling with your children. We should have put traveling with children or your children and grandchildren. But I mean, a lot of things in the book, hopefully, are useful to people who aren't traveling with children, but are interested in, if not making the world a better place, certainly not making it a worse place. So some of the tips of eating out in local restaurants, it may be easier if you don't have kids who turn up their nose at different foods. On the other hand, eating at local restaurants is a great experience to let children try different things. And if they're in a different country, quite often they'll try things they would never try at home and quite enjoy them. One of our trips, when my son was 5, we ended up as the only parents with one other couple in a particular hotel. And there was another little boy who was aged 5 as well, who unusually for Norwegians hadn't yet learned to speak English. And he and my son got on great, and they played a lot of times. And he said something to his mother, and she laughed, and she said, he was saying, your son's really fun and nice, but he must be dumb because he doesn't speak Norwegian. By the end of the week, they swapped languages and were chatting away to each other with a sort of mixture of English and Norwegian words thrown in, and not caring really about what they were saying. So language can be a barrier, but it can also be a fun thing. And looking at a menu in another language is a good way to learn a few words. And kids are really quite fascinated sometimes by the different names that the same food has, but in different places. And the same with adults. So, you can be responsible without kids as well as with kids.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about international travel, but all the rules of being more responsible and traveling more responsibly can apply to going to your local campsite or to grandma's house. It doesn't have to be overseas. And, I think the pandemic has made us all a little bit more anxious and a little bit more closed-minded, but traveling can be a force for good. And if we make it more responsible, then it's going to benefit everyone, not just our children, but ourselves, the places we go, the economies that we put money into, the communities we visit, and overall our planet. So if you have questions, please feel free to look at them. We have, please feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, or on Twitter is Sust Tourism. Instagram is Responsible Tourism, TSM at the end of it, after responsible. And yeah, there's some videos on YouTube and things like that. So we're more than happy to share. But we're sorry we couldn't touch everything in the book, and it's very strange being a one-way conversation. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And we hope that you will travel more responsibly with your children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews.
Thank you both for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar today. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.